Rain came sideways across Terminal 3 at Heathrow. That morning, the kind that blurs the window glass into abstraction and makes the concourse feel smaller than it is. The premium boarding lane for Skyvale Flight 711 was already occupied by the people who traveled this way regularly. Men in wool suits with carry-ons that cost more than most people's monthly rent. A woman in business dress who handed over her boarding pass without looking up from her phone, a retired executive who greeted the gate agent by her first name. Then Julian Mercer walked up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, 45 years old, wearing a gray hoodie under a dark jacket, clean joggers, a pair of athletic shoes that were not new, but were not dirty. He carried a dark leather backpack and a boarding pass he had folded once. He did not look like a man on his way somewhere to make an impression. He looked like a man who had already decided that impressions were not the point. The gate agent, Melissa Grant, did not look up when he approached. "Economy boarding starts in 40 minutes, she said. Please step to the other line." Several people nearby turned to look. Julian said, "I'm in first class." Melissa looked up then, not quickly, the kind of look that starts at the shoes and considers its opinion on the way to the face. "Your boarding pass?" He handed it over. She ran it through the scanner. The machine responded with a green light and a tone. "Priority confirmed. Seat 1A." Melissa's expression did not change. She handed the pass back without a word of apology or correction, and Julian Mercer walked down the jet bridge onto Flight 711. Now, there are people who have spent their careers learning how to read an airline. Julian Mercer was one of those people, and what he had learned was that the way a carrier treats a passenger it has decided does not belong is the most honest data point available. You could study cargo manifests and quarterly reports and employee satisfaction surveys, and those things told you what a company chose to show you. But 5 minutes in a boarding lane told you what the company actually was. He turned left at the cabin door. Veronica Hale was the first-class lead flight attendant, a woman of 48 who had spent 20 years learning exactly how this particular world was supposed to work, who got the champagne without asking, who got the menu recitation with the chef's name attached, who got the blanket offered before the seatbelt sign went off. She had a professional smile that she deployed with precision, and she did not deploy it when Julian Mercer rested his hand on the back of seat 1A. "Economy is behind you, sir." He handed her his boarding pass. 1A, he said. She looked at the number. Then she looked at him. Then she looked at the seat as if the seat had made an error she would need to address later. Julian sat down. Emily Carter stood near the galley curtain, young, 2 years on the job, still at the stage of believing this work could be beautiful if the right people were in it. She watched Veronica's face and understood that the flight had been categorized before the wheels went up. At cruising altitude, Veronica came down the aisle with the service cart. She stopped at 1A. Julian asked for black coffee. She placed the cup on his tray table, with a motion that was not quite deliberate and not quite accidental. The cup seated too hard. Coffee pushed over the rim and spread across the open laptop. Julian lifted the machine immediately. The screen flickered. A document visible on screen, an acquisition memo dense with figures, caught a dark stain along one margin. "A cloth," he said. Veronica tilted her head. "I'm attending to actual passengers." The words landed in the cabin the way something dropped from a height lands, with a sound that everybody hears and nobody immediately accounts for. Charles Whitman in seat 1C looked up from his newspaper. The woman in seat 2A, who had been watching since the boarding lane, adjusted her phone quietly on her knee. Emily reached toward the stack of cabin linens. "Emily." Veronica's voice was soft and final. "I didn't ask for your assistance." Julian looked at Veronica. "You spilled coffee on my equipment," he said. His voice had not risen by a single degree. "I would like a cloth." "You should be more careful," Veronica said, "about bringing that kind of device into this kind of cabin." The quiet that followed was a different kind of quiet than the one before it. Emily extended the white cloth anyway. Julian took it. He said thank you to her, the way a person says thank you when they mean it, and they know the other person needed to hear it. Veronica watched this transaction with an expression that had moved past professionalism into something older and less examined. When Captain Robert Keene stepped out of the cockpit 20 minutes later, it was because Veronica had described a difficult passenger in seat 1A who was creating a disturbance. Robert Keene was 56, silver-haired, the kind of man who understood command as a personal property and a cockpit door as the last honest line between his authority and whatever the cabin chose to believe about itself. He looked at Julian. He looked at the hoodie. He decided, "Sir, I need you to lower your voice and cooperate with my crew." Julian looked at him. "I haven't raised my voice," he said. "This is my aircraft," Keene said. Julian held the captain's gaze for a moment before he answered. "Not much longer," he said. Keene went back to the cockpit. Veronica counted it as a victory. The cabin settled into the particular tension of a space where something has been pressed down without being resolved. Julian opened his phone under the tray table and sent a message to a number in New York. "Move closing window forward. Preserve all Flight 711 records. Focus A7. The reply came in 40 seconds. Control transfer can complete mid-flight. Board notified. Evidence hold ready. Julian set the phone face down on the armrest. He looked at the galley curtain. Behind it, toward the rear of the premium service area, was a storage cart marked with a sequence of letters and numbers that appeared in no fewer than 14 financial irregularity flags across the Skyvale cargo audit. He had been building for 3 months. He could wait. He had come on this flight intending to wait, to see, and document and do nothing, until the paperwork was filed in New York, and the ownership was clean, and the announcements could be made through proper channels. He had planned to be invisible for one more transatlantic crossing. Then Veronica Hale had poured coffee on his laptop and told him he didn't belong in the room. He had made his decision somewhere between the impact of the cup and the particular cold amusement in her voice. He would not wait. Julian Mercer had not arrived at where he was by being born there. His father, Leon Mercer, had worked the ramp at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta for 31 years, loading and unloading aircraft through the kind of weather that doesn't get included in the marketing materials, baking summers and sleety winters, and every variety of pre-dawn cold that a Georgia morning can produce when nobody of consequence is watching. Leon had been injured on the job in 1997, his shoulder torn in a night shift accident that the ground operations manager documented incorrectly, and the airline's legal team subsequently characterized as personal inattention. He received 18 months of partial pay and a medical separation. His name did not appear in any company history of the era, but he had taught his son one thing with great clarity. "A plane doesn't fly because of the champagne," he used to say. "It flies because of the people. Nobody looks at doing their jobs right." Julian had taken that lesson into finance, then into aviation investment, not into the glamour side but into the operational side, into understanding what made a carrier functional at its roots, and what made it sick. He had spent his first decade learning cargo economics, labor contracts, maintenance cycle costing, the particular arithmetic of how a fleet ages and what it costs to pretend it isn't. He did not invest in airlines that had good branding. He invested in airlines that could be made to work if you started from the people who actually ran them. Skyvale Airways had come to his attention as a carrier in distress. Debt-loaded, hemorrhaging experienced staff, fielding discrimination complaints that were being closed without investigation, maintaining a cargo exception program under a classification called A7 that did not reconcile cleanly with its declared manifests. He had acquired a minority stake 18 months prior and spent those building the case for full control. 2 weeks before Flight 711, the board had agreed in principle to terms. The closing paperwork was being executed in real time in New York, while he sat at 35,000 feet. He had come on this flight without announcing himself because he needed to see the airline as it was, not as it became when it knew it was being watched. The airline had been very willing to show him. Skyvale had been, in its advertising, a thing of considerable elegance. Soft lighting in the cabin photographs, Menu cards with the executive chef's name in italic. Cabin crew in tailored navy, hair pinned precisely. Smiles calibrated to suggest exclusive access to a world you had, by purchasing this seat, been temporarily admitted to. The brand language was all about elevation. The word appearing in some form in nearly every campaign. You will be elevated. Your experience will be elevated. We elevate travel. The elevator, Julian had found in 18 months of forensic review, went more than one direction. Hein Crike de Amo, who complained about service differential, were routed to a customer experience team that had a template response and a 30-day closure bar policy. Tiep Vien, who raised cargo anomalies, were not disciplined immediately, which was too visible. They were simply assigned to the routes that nobody with experience wanted, the short-haul overnight domestic schedules, until they decided on their own that Skyvale was not the right fit. Captains who had generated multiple complaints from passengers over their handling of in-cabin conflicts were protected by a seniority system that confused longevity with performance. And in the cargo hold, under the ordinary contents of the A7 service cart, was a channel that Malcolm Reed had been running for almost 2 years, a shadow logistics stream that used the airline's manifesting system the way a pickpocket uses a crowd, in the noise and motion of normal commerce, slipping things through that nobody was supposed to notice. Julian had noticed. He had 3 months of notice, documented and time-stamped and encrypted, on a server his legal team controlled. What he needed was evidence that had been collected on the aircraft itself, evidence that would establish chain of custody from the cargo hold, to the cart, to the cabin, in front of witnesses, under conditions that could not be retroactively characterized as manufactured. Veronica Hale had given him his witnesses. Emily Carter had wanted to be a flight attendant since she was a child watching planes approach from her mother's backyard in Ohio. The clean lines of them, the way they carried people from one version of their lives to another. She had earned the certification, interviewed twice, received the offer from Skyvale. She had believed it was the beginning of something. 2 years in, she knew the beginning of something was also the beginning of something else. The thing she was told not to see. The seal on A7 that was sometimes wrong. The cart that sometimes weighed more than it should have. The manifest that sometimes arrived late, and sometimes didn't reconcile with what was loaded. The look Veronica gave anyone who asked the wrong question. The name of a colleague who had reported something once, and found herself on the overnight domestic routes until she quit. Emily had been quiet about these things because quiet was the price of keeping the job, and the job was the price of the life she had built around it. She was not cruel. She was young, and she was afraid, and those two things together can look like the same thing as cruelty. From the outside, when you are on the wrong side of them. She gave Julian Mercer the white cloth, because she could not give it to him. Whatever she was afraid of giving up, it was not larger than the ability to look at herself. At hour 4 of the crossing, Julian pressed the call button. Veronica came. "I need access to A7, he said. She produced a smile that had clearly been constructed in front of mirrors. "That's a service compartment. Passengers don't have access." "I'm not requesting it as a passenger," Julian said. He spoke at a volume that carried exactly as far as the surrounding seats and no further. Skyvale cargo manifest for this flight lists 3 A7 premium handling items with no declared weight. The seal on that cart is not standard grade cargo compliance. I want the compartment opened and inventoried under witness. Veronica's smile lasted approximately 3 more seconds. Captain Keene stepped out again. Julian stood up, slow, deliberate, not threatening. "Captain Keene," he said, "the seal on A7 is not compliant. The manifest has undeclared items. I am requesting that cart be secured and opened under crew witness before we land." Keene said, "You are not authorized to make requests about cargo." Julian looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up the cabin interphone from the bulkhead beside his seat and pressed the all-cabin button before Keene could move to stop him. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Julian Mercer, seat 1A. As of approximately 1 hour ago, Mercer Aviation Holdings completed the acquisition of controlling interest in Skyvale Airways. I apologize for the interruption to your flight. This aircraft is involved in an active compliance review. Upon landing, all passengers will receive full refunds. Thank you for your patience. He set the interphone back in its cradle. The cabin noise that followed was not loud. It was the sound of many people simultaneously reassessing what they thought they were in the middle of. Veronica Hale stood very still. Captain Keene had the look of a man watching the wall he had leaned on his whole career begin to slide. Julian turned to the galley. "Emily," he said, "have you seen the seal on A7 replaced on previous flights?" Veronica said, "Do not answer that." Julian said nothing else. He did not repeat the question or vary it. He just waited. Emily looked at Veronica, at Keene, at Julian, at the white cloth still folded on the armrest where he had left it. "Yes," she said, more than once. Veronica said her name in a tone designed to close a door. Emily kept going. "We were told not to report it, not to touch that cart unless Veronica or the cargo supervisor asked. One time I saw the cargo director load it himself. Veronica said it was premium handling, that we didn't need to understand it." Julian said, "Thank you. Please open A7 now." Emily's hands shook slightly when she reached the cart. The standard seal came away with less resistance than it should have. Real cargo seals are not easy to cut. This one came apart like paper. She opened the upper tray. Standard duty-free inventory, the kind that appeared in the manifest correctly. Julian said, "Remove the second tray." She did. Beneath it was a thin panel, the kind that looked like the bottom of a storage compartment and was not. Captain Keene turned his face toward the cockpit door. Charles Whitman said something very quiet to himself. The woman in seat 2A had stopped pretending to watch a film. Julian lifted the panel. Below it, packed in gray foam, were items that did not belong in a service cart. Luxury timepieces still in their retail housings, their manifests absent. Electronic components labeled as catering supply in weights and configurations that made no mechanical sense. 3 sealed envelopes, the kind used for internal cash transfers in operations that prefer not to be traceable. A hard drive in an evidence bag with a cargo reference number that did not match any line on the flight's official documentation. Julian photographed everything, each item, each label, each reference number. He sent the photographs to Nathan Brooks in New York in a single secure transfer. Nathan's response was immediate. FBI, Customs, FAA compliance notified. JFK remote stand assigned. Do not allow anyone to alter the cart. Julian looked at Veronica. "You knew about this compartment," he said. "It was not a question." Veronica said, "I followed operational directives." He looked at Keene. "You knew the seal wasn't standard." Keene said nothing. "These are not accusations," Julian said. "They are the beginning of a record." He addressed the full cabin without raising his voice. No one should delete any communications or leave their seat for any non-essential reason. No one should approach the galley unaccompanied. When we land, federal agents will board. Please cooperate with the process, Veronica said quietly. You can't do this to me. Julian looked at her. You made the choices that got us here, he said. I only opened the compartment. The last hour of Flight 711 passed in a silence that was not peaceful, but was, in its way, honest. Veronica sat in the jump seat, with her hands folded, and her face arranged in an expression that had no category. Captain Keene did not emerge from the cockpit. Emily stood near the galley with her back straight, not looking at anyone in particular, doing the private work of a person who has made a decision they cannot unmake and has decided not to regret it. Julian said to her, at one point, you did the right thing. Emily said, late. Julian said, late is not the same as never. She looked out the porthole at the Atlantic below, the water gray and vast and indifferent. And she held that sentence the way you hold something that has some weight in it. Flight 711 touched down at JFK and rolled not to its assigned gate, but to a remote stand on the south perimeter of the field. Through the oval windows, the passengers could see the vehicles waiting, federal cars, customs vans, airport security, their lights cold and methodical in the early afternoon. Veronica stood up. I need to use the restroom, she said. Julian did not look up from his phone. "Sit down," she said. "You have no authority over." He looked at her. She sat down. Special Agent Rebecca Shaw came up the stairs first. Federal credentials, the economical manner of someone who does this work regularly, and has learned that everything that happens after the first 30 seconds depends on the tone of the first 30 seconds. "Julian Mercer?" "Yes. We have the evidence package from Nathan Brooks. A7 is aft of the galley. Emily Carter is the cooperating witness. Passenger in seat 2A has video of the initial service incident. I can walk you through the documentation in order." Shaw said, "Please do." It took 4 hours to process the cabin. Customs went through the cart item by item. FAA compliance took statements from every crew member separately. The passenger in seat 2A, a labor attorney from London, handed over her phone without being asked. Charles Whitman, who had been silent through most of the flight, sat down with an agent for 20 minutes and gave a statement that he had seen the service incident clearly and had not intervened, and that he wanted his account of it on record. When all the passengers had finally been escorted through a processing area and released, the aircraft sat empty at the remote stand under the portable lights. The white cloth was still in seat 1A, where Julian had left it deliberately when he disembarked. The next morning in Skyvale's 44th floor boardroom, Julian's set a single item on the table before anyone said anything. The white cabin cloth, dried and stained, still carrying the shape of the coffee Veronica Hale had poured onto his laptop. Alan Pierce began with the language of crisis management. Julian let him finish. Then Nathan Brooks opened his laptop and walked through the documentation. The video, the crew reports, 18 months of A7 cargo exceptions, the manifest discrepancies, the emails between Malcolm Reed and the offshore accounts, the cargo transfers or funding, the list of discrimination complaints that had been closed without review, the names of employees who had been moved to less desirable positions after raising concerns. Malcolm Reed said, several minutes in, "Cargo operations are complex. You can't evaluate them from the passenger cabin." Julian said, "My father worked the ramp in Atlanta for 31 years. Don't tell me that the people who aren't visible don't understand how this works." Emily Carter was brought in for the last part of the meeting. She wore a plain navy suit and did not smile the way she had been trained to smile. Not from the professional distance that a flight attendant uses with customers, but with her own face, which was tired and a little afraid and completely present. Alan Pierce looked at her and said, "She's a junior flight attendant." Julian said, "She's the only person on Flight 711 who chose the truth when silence was the safer option." The resolution came in the hours that followed. Alan Pierce was removed as CEO. Malcolm Reed was suspended pending federal investigation. Veronica Hale's contract was terminated, and her conduct referred to the FAA for review. Captain Robert Keene's license was suspended during the investigation period. The A7 program was shut down with immediate effect, and all related cargo exceptions audited. Every discrimination complaint filed in the previous 36 months was reopened. Each employee who had been reassigned after raising compliance concerns was contacted directly and offered reinstatement or settlement. Skyvale Airways would be restructured under a new name, Mercer Air. Julian offered Emily Carter the position of Vice President of Passenger Dignity and Service Accountability. She accepted after a day of thinking about it, which Julian thought was exactly the right amount of time to think about something that changed what your days were for. 3 months later, the first aircraft in Mercer Air's colors was prepared for its inaugural departure from Atlanta. The livery was silver and deep blue, with a white line along the fuselage, clean and not flashy, the kind of design that would hold up in 30 years without embarrassing anyone. Near the forward boarding door, in letters small enough to be humble, were 4 words, "No passenger is invisible." Julian stood in the terminal and watched the boarding process through the gate window. No special look at the man in the hoodie, no second scan of the woman traveling on points, no assumption built into the way the agent at the podium reached for the scanner. Just the ordinary, careful work of moving people from one place to another, without deciding in advance who deserved to arrive. An older man in a ground crew vest extended his hand before Julian reached the gate. "Your father used to work here," the man said. "He did," Julian said. "He told me once that the plane only lands right because the people nobody watches do their jobs right." Julian stood with that for a moment. "He was right," he said. Emily was at the door of the aircraft as passengers boarded. She looked at each one with the particular attention of someone who has decided that attention itself is a form of respect, not the professional variety learned from a training manual, but the real kind, the kind that costs something to maintain and that you give anyway. Charles Whitman had sent a written statement to the investigation 6 weeks earlier. In it, he wrote that he had been present when a passenger was humiliated and had said nothing, and that he did not want his silence to be interpreted as neutrality. He asked that his account be entered into the record as statement of a witness who failed to witness with integrity. Julian received a copy. He read it once and filed it. It was not enough to change what had happened. It was not nothing either. Julian did not think about what had occurred on Flight 711 as winning. What it felt like, when he thought about it honestly, was correction, which was slower and harder and more important than winning, and which left you not with triumph, but with the particular quiet of a thing that needed doing and now was done. They had looked at seat 1A and read it as a verdict about who was allowed. What a seat number actually contained, he knew, was nothing at all. It contained the person who sat in it, and the person who sat in it had no obligation to prove anything to anyone. Before the aircraft pushed back from the gate, the white cloth in his jacket pocket on the walk to the terminal that afternoon was not a trophy, it was a record. Here is what was asked for, and here is who gave it. That was the whole story. No passenger is invisible. Not the man in the hoodie in seat 1A. Not the young woman in the galley who made a single choice and lived with what it cost her. Not the 31 years of a man on a rain-slicked ramp in Atlanta that nobody put in the annual report. All of them had been on that aircraft. All of them had landed. Thank you for watching. This channel is no longer supported by ads, and these stories continue because people believe they matter. Patreon is a quiet way to support the work with early access, story previews, and small moments of input before each tale is fully told. On screen now is a preview of the Patreon page. If you'd like to support the channel, the invitation is in the first pinned comment down below. I'll see you in the next story.